So good to have you join us today. Hello and welcome to Business Daily. I'm Lee in Seoul. Before we get started, let's first get a quick check of today's highlights. Korea's labor-related indices such as the employment rate and wages have all sunk among OECD countries in spite of slight improvements seen in other areas such as productivity. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's ruling coalition won a landslide victory on Sunday, and this is expected to speed up Abe's economic policies known as Abenomics. We'll sit down with an expert to talk about this. But first, the government has seen its tax pile grow in the first 5 months of the year, expanding by 19 trillion won compared to the same period last year. Now, that's equivalent to about $16.5 billion US dollars. The added revenue is being attributed to corporate earnings being revised up at the end of last year, as well as property transfer taxes from a hot real estate market. The Ministry of Strategy and Finance adds the sum accounts for a progress ratio of over 50%, up by 7.2 percentage points of what it was as of the end of May last year. It also said it was closely monitoring conditions in the second half of the year, as state income could slow on the back of internal and external risks, such as corporate restructuring and Brexit. Korea's financial authorities will work to submit a bill for a supplementary budget worth roughly 10 trillion won or $9 billion US dollars to the National Assembly at the earliest time possible. This is according to Finance Minister Yoo Il-ho, who also urged lawmakers to quickly pass the bill once submitted. Speaking at the National Assembly on Tuesday, Yoo said the extra budget as part of a larger fiscal stimulus package will cushion external risks stemming from the events such as Brexit and the ongoing corporate restructuring drive at home. He also said the added spending will also be used to create more jobs and improve the livelihoods of socially vulnerable groups. Samsung Electronics posted its biggest ever quarterly sales in the global NAND flash market in the first 3 months of the year. According to U.S.-based market research firm IHS, Samsung recorded first quarter sales of $2.6 billion US dollars, more than 3% higher than the previous quarter. This further solidifies Samsung's position as the market's biggest player, with its market share topping 42%. In fact, Samsung has been the market leader for 14 straight years. NAND flash is a type of non-volatile storage technology that's widely used in smartphones and laptops. Korea's GDP has grown substantially over the past 2 decades since it joined the OECD back in 1996. But while the size of the economy might have grown, 11 out of 14 labor-related indices rank below average. Our Lee Joo-young has more.
It's been 20 years since Korea became a member of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or the OECD. Ever since joining in 1996, Korea's nominal GDP has jumped roughly threefold from $656 billion to $1.7 trillion. The country's economy now ranks the 8th largest out of all 34 OECD members. But when it comes to the country's quantitative labor indices, it's a different story. According to data analyzed by the Federation of Korean Industries, Korea's labor force participation rate fell from 23rd in 1996 to 26th in 2014. For women, the ranking fell even further to 30th. In terms of its employment rate, Korea's footing slid as well, from number 17 to 20, while that of women dipped to 26. The country's workers earn roughly $36,000 a year, which puts Korea in 17th place. But they also spend the longest hours at work, following countries like Mexico and Chile. When it comes to the gender pay gap, Korea ranked last out of the 18 countries surveyed.
Korea's qualitative labor indexes have somewhat improved, but women's economic participation is still low compared to other OECD members. This in turn aggravates the gender pay gap.
The Federation says the recent increase in youth unemployment is another main reason behind the drop in rankings. It adds that in order for the country's labor market to gain competitiveness, long-term structural improvements like overhauling the seniority-based wage system and proper compensation of overtime are needed. Lee Ju-young, Business Daily.
It's been 8 years since the inter-Korean Mount Kumgang tours have been suspended after a South Korean tourist was shot to death at the resort. And given the current icy relations between the two Koreas, it's unlikely that the tours will reopen anytime soon. Our Eunice Kim has the story.
1998, a watershed moment in inter-Korean relations. Hyundai Asan opens an era of tours, allowing South Koreans to visit the beauty of Mount Kumgang in the north. For some, a step closer to home.
옛날 고향이에요. 저 이게 쭉 계속 가게 되면 고향 땅까지 가지 않겠냐 하는 그런.
But it's an era that would not last long. Over 10 years, nearly 2 million South Koreans made the trek north of the 38th parallel before Seoul shut down the tours after a South Korean tourist was fatally shot on July 11, 2008 by a North Korean soldier at the resort. What was once a busy gateway now only houses a few empty buses. Hyundai Asan keeps a staff just 1/5 of what it was. And despite a mounting sales loss that surpassed 1 trillion won, it holds on to hopes of reopening.
Hyundai Asan exists for inter-Korean cooperation projects, so we're continuing to prepare to resume operations.
It's a wait that's lasted 8 years, and one that for now looks to last. On the anniversary on Monday, a group of smaller business people tied to the Kumgang tours called on the government for additional compensation for their lost investment, that they say amounts to some $148 million.
If a resumption looks unlikely because of the nuclear issue, we're asking for some type of plan to cover our losses from the past 8 to 9 years.
Seoul's Unification Ministry this week ruled out the resumption of any inter-Korean tour program as the international community continues to apply pressure on Pyongyang through sanctions, which have been met by belligerent missile and nuclear tests. The waiting game continues. Eunice Kim, Business Daily.
Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's Liberal Democrats grabbed a victory in the country's upper house election over the weekend, bolstering Abe's chances of accelerating his key economic policy. Let's take a closer look.
After securing a landslide win for the ruling coalition, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe ordered a fresh round of fiscal stimulus, extending his commitment to keep the economy his top priority. With the election results widely seen as an endorsement of Abe's economic reforms, analysts are now expecting bolder movements from the government in drafting economic policy. Abenomics has been the Prime Minister's central framework to boost the Japanese economy since 2012, aiming to lift domestic spending and weaken the Japanese yen. But most economists believe it has not done enough to boost the economy as a whole. Now, with this victory behind him, Abe is expected to put together a spending package of more than 10 trillion yen, or nearly $100 billion in the coming months. So how will Abe's new set of economy-spurring measures affect Japan? And what will this mean for the Korean economy?
And for more on this topic, Professor Jung Joon Suk from the Catholic University of Korea joins us in the studio today. So good to see you, Professor.
Happy to be here.
So before we dive into our questions for today, help us jog our memory. Tell us about the framework of Abenomics and what its goals were.
Okay, well, the original Abenomics had supposedly 3 arrows. The first arrow is a massive expansionary monetary policy. They're going to print a lot of money. And they wanted to do that because, well, one of the biggest problems in the Japanese economy was not only the reduced demand, but also deflation. Whenever you have deflation, people actually don't want to spend that very much because prices are dropping, so they can always pick it up for cheaper later on. So what Abe wanted to do with monetary policy was not only drop the interest rate, but also print so much money that inflation will go up. So that was the first arrow. With the first arrow, though, there's sort of a hidden agenda. when you print a lot of money, the value of the Japanese yen depreciates in the international foreign exchange rate market.
Right.
So another goal of this massive monetary policy was to depreciate the yen and get Japan exporting again. So that's the first arrow. The second arrow is massive expansionary fiscal policy, followed by more taxes.
Okay.
Because Japan had spent so much money during 1990s and 2000s, they have a very high government level of government debt. So initially, they wanted to have a large fiscal spending so they could also pick up the demand and pick up the economy. But then when the economy starts picking up, they will increase taxes to reduce the debt burden. And then the third arrow is more long-term in nature, more supply-oriented in nature, but they would have a lot of regulatory reform and restructuring of the economy so that they can have a more productive economy for the future.
But like we heard in the report, though, many economists have actually said that Abenomics has failed to boost a broader economy. So what's your assessment of Abenomics and what kind of impact did it have on the Korean economy up until now?
Well, the problem with Abenomics seems to be that some of it was a lot of missteps, some of it was very bad luck, and some of them was lack of political will. The first arrow, massive expansionary monetary policy, that's what everybody was concerned about, that's what everybody heard a lot. And it did succeed in depreciating the yen for a while, but whenever you had an international crisis, international problems in the financial market, because the yen was seen as a safe asset, the yen appreciated, undoing a lot of Abenomics work. And we've seen that about 3 times since the Abenomics started. So even though the trend has been generally downwards, sometimes the yen appreciated so that cut into a lot of the export effects. And also the export market not being very good because of the global slowdown certainly didn't help. Now, the misstep is when the Abenomics first started, and it seemed to be catching on, they increased the consumption tax much too early.
Okay.
So that killed whatever momentum for growth that they had, and they've never been able to recover from that. And then the third arrow, the long-term regulatory reforms, well, those have been politically very controversial. So some of the reforms went through, a lot of it didn't. And that's a very bad picture for Korea, for Japan's long-term productivity. What this meant for Korea, well, Korea had to sort of compete with Japanese low interest rate. They also had to compete with low value of Japanese yen. So that has created a lot of competition, global competition between Japanese goods, Korean goods, Japanese financial products and Korean financial products. So it's created basically more competition and more difficulties for the Korean economy.
And we actually saw Japanese shares rallying after the election victory, and the yen has been on a slide. What has been the reason behind this?
Okay, well, yen has been appreciating because of Brexit and because Japanese yen is seen as a safe asset. But when the yen appreciates, it doesn't mean that means Japan has more difficulty exporting. So that doesn't mean is not good news for Japanese stock market. So now, and Abe says he's going to continue Abenomics, he's going to try to depreciate the yen even more. That's actually good news for a lot of exporting firms. So I think that's why the stock market went up.
Now, the Japanese yen has, for the most part, has been on a general climb. So wouldn't that be good news for Korean exporters?
Okay, well, because of Brexit, the Japanese yen has appreciated, but we've seen this about 2 or 3 times. For about a month or two, the Japanese yen appreciates, and then when the international crisis is over, things become stable again, then yen depreciates again. Whereas Korean won, whenever there's an international problem, it depreciates, and then when things are stable, it appreciates. So I think we're sort of caught right at the end part of the Brexit, and things are returning to normal, so we'll see the yen depreciating again, helped by the further push from Abenomics and Korean won appreciating again, so Korean exporters are going to start worrying again.
Now, I know the details are not clear yet, but can you tell us some of what we can expect from the fiscal stimulus package that the Abe has in mind?
Okay, so far they haven't decided on the details, and details are going to be very important because, between about 1995 to 2010, Japan continually tried massive fiscal policy, but it didn't work. Partially because they wasted a lot of the money building capital that they did not need, like bridges to nowhere. So it really depends on how they're going to target that 10 trillion won, which is about 1% of their GDP. If they use it wisely, then they may be able to help pick up the Japanese economy. But if they waste it like they did in the 1990s and 2000s, then it's just going to add to the government debt.
So what's your outlook on Abenomics from here on out, and how should Korea respond to, I guess, upcoming changes from Japan?
Okay, well, Japan actually doesn't have a lot of choice in this matter. The traditional macroeconomic textbook says that if you want to increase the GDP, you have monetary policy, fiscal policy, and then supply-oriented policies to increase productivity. They're using all of that in Abenomics. With the slight change this time, perhaps, that they're not going to do a lot of structural reforms or regulatory reforms which are politically controversial, because Abe wants to change the constitution and he needs help from opposing political parties for that. From Korea's point of view, well, more Abenomics means more export competition from Japan, so that's going to be bad news for Korean exporters. But given the very slow growth nature of global economy right now, Japan, if their growth rate goes up, that could only mean good for the Asian regional economy. So for Korea, Abenomics is very much a mixed picture. We kind of hope that their export doesn't improve too much, but their domestic economy will.
All right. Thank you so much for your insight today, Professor.
Thank you.
And that wraps it up for today, but we'll be back tomorrow with more at the same time, same place for your Business Daily. So don't forget to tune in then. Thanks for watching and see you soon.